The moment Elara whispered the final words carved above the Alpha King's throne, every wolf outside the castle began to howl. The king suddenly stood up. His face turned white. Then, without explaining a single thing, he ordered every soldier, servant, and noble to leave the hall. The massive doors slammed shut. Elara was left alone with the king, the ancient seal, and a secret that had been buried for 300 years. But when the final symbol began glowing beneath her fingers, Elara discovered something that terrified her more than the wolves. The moment Elara translated the ancient seal above the Alpha King's throne, every wolf in the castle began to howl. It started with one distant cry from the kennels beneath the eastern tower. Then another answered from the courtyard. Then another. Within seconds, the sound rolled through the fortress like a cold wind moving through the mountains, rising from every corner of Varrek until the great hall itself seemed to tremble beneath it. Elara froze beneath the enormous silver seal. Her fingers were still resting against the old stone. The cleaning cloth had slipped from her hand and lay forgotten at her feet. Across the hall, Alpha King Aldrin had stopped speaking. His face had gone strangely pale. He was seated upon the black stone throne beneath the seal, surrounded by nobles dressed in winter velvet and fur, but now none of them moved. The musicians had lowered their instruments. Servants stood motionless beside the long tables. Even the guards near the doors looked toward the windows as another wolf howled outside. Elara slowly turned. The king was staring directly at her. Not at the seal. Not at the wolves. At her. 3 years earlier, no one in the castle would have remembered her name. She had arrived at Varrek Fortress as a thin, quiet girl with a small bundle of clothes and a silver pendant that had belonged to her father. Since then, she had learned how to move silently through royal corridors, how to polish ancient floors without disturbing sleeping nobles, and how to make herself invisible whenever powerful people entered a room. She had never expected to stand beneath the throne and speak words that had not been spoken for 300 years. The inscription had always looked like decoration. A circle of silver wolves surrounded an old symbol carved into black stone. Generations of kings had placed their banners beneath it. Priests had blessed it. Historians had called it the first king's seal. But Elara knew better. She had known it the moment she saw the markings. They belonged to an older language. A language her father had taught her when she was small enough to sit on his knees beside the fire. She could still remember his finger moving slowly across the pages of his worn books. Not all words are meant to be spoken, little one. Some are meant to be remembered. Her father had disappeared when she was 8. The royal record said he had stolen forbidden documents from the archives and fled. Elara had never believed it. Her mother had died the following winter. After that, there had been no one left to defend his name. So Elara had carried the silver pendant, carried the questions, and carried the few pieces of language her father had left behind. Now, standing beneath the throne, she looked up at the final line she had uncovered beneath centuries of dust. Her lips parted. "The crown protects the kingdom," she whispered. The king stood. Elara looked at him. His hand tightened around the arm of the throne. "Keep reading," he said. Something in his voice made the hall colder. Elara swallowed. She touched the next symbol. "The crown protects the kingdom only while." She stopped. The final word was damaged. But she knew it. Her father had taught it to her. While the throne remains worthy of protection. Silence fell. Then the wolves began howling again. King Aldrin looked toward the guards. Everyone out. No one moved. The king's voice sharpened. "Every soldier. Every servant. Every noble. Empty this hall." Confusion spread through the room. Lord Varrek, the king's oldest advisor, rose slowly from his seat. "My king." "Out." The single word echoed beneath the stone ceiling. Chairs scraped. Boots hurried across the floor. Servants lowered their eyes as they passed Elara. Nobles whispered behind gloved hands. The musicians carried their instruments away. Guards closed the doors behind the last person. Then the great hall became silent. King Aldrin walked to the doors himself. He pushed both iron bolts into place. Clang! Clang! Elara stood alone beneath the ancient seal. The king turned toward her. For several seconds neither spoke. Then his eyes moved to the silver pendant hanging from her neck. His expression changed. "Where did you get that?" Elara's hand instinctively closed around it. "My father." The king stared at the pendant as though it had just become a weapon. "Your father's name?" "Edric Vale." Aldrin's jaw tightened. The name had meant something to him. That frightened Elara more than the locked doors. "What did he tell you about this seal?" he asked. "Nothing about the seal." The king looked unconvinced. "He taught me the language." "Why?" "I don't know." Outside, the wolves continued to howl. Elara looked up at the ancient writing. Then she noticed something she had never seen before. A thin line beneath the seal had begun to glow. Not brightly, just enough to reveal another sentence. A sentence hidden beneath the stone. She stepped closer. The king followed. Elara read the first word. Then the second. Her breathing slowed. The old warning was not finished. There was another message. And it began with a name. Her name. Elara. She whispered it. The king heard. His eyes widened. And somewhere beneath the castle, something ancient answered. The hidden chamber beneath the throne was older than the castle itself. Elara discovered that when King Aldrin pressed his hand against a carved wolf beside the throne and the black stone moved with a deep grinding sound. A narrow staircase appeared beneath them. Cold air rose from the darkness. It smelled of earth, iron, and something older than either. Elara stood at the top of the steps, staring down. King Aldrin took a torch from its bracket. "Stay behind me." She almost smiled. It was strange hearing concern in the voice of the man she had spent years avoiding in hallways. "I know how to walk downstairs, Your Majesty." He glanced at her. "Tonight, I am not certain what you know." They descended. The passage ended in a circular room beneath the throne. Its walls were covered in carvings. Wolves. Mountains. Kings kneeling before people who wore no crowns. And at the center stood a stone tablet covered in the same ancient language. Elara approached it. Her hand trembled. She read slowly. "Before Varrek had walls." Her voice echoed. "The first Alpha made a pact with the guardian of the mountain." King Aldrin stood behind her. The guardian bloodline was sworn to protect the kingdom. Elara continued. "Not the crown." She paused. "The kingdom." Aldrin said nothing. She moved down the tablet. "The guardian shall never be chosen by birthright, wealth, rank, or blood." The torch flame moved across his face. Elara read the next line. "She shall be recognized by compassion given when no reward is expected." The king looked at her. Elara looked back. Neither understood the significance yet. Then she reached the next section. "The wolves shall know her." A distant howl rolled through the stone beneath them. Elara's fingers tightened around the pendant. The king stared at it. "Show me." She hesitated. Then she removed it from her neck. The pendant was small and worn, shaped like a wolf surrounded by a circle. Aldrin took it carefully. The moment the metal touched his palm, the markings on the stone tablet brightened. He dropped it. The pendant struck the floor. A pulse of silver light moved through the room. Elara stepped backward. The king's breathing changed. "Your father stole this," he whispered. Elara's face hardened. "No." Aldrin looked at her. "He was accused of stealing from the archives." "He was framed." The words escaped before she could stop them. The king stared. "How do you know?" "Because he never ran." Her voice shook. "If he had stolen something, he would have taken me with him. He didn't." She looked toward the dark staircase. "He disappeared." Aldrin lowered his eyes. "My father ordered the investigation." Elara stared at him. "Did he?" Aldrin's expression tightened. "He was king then." That answer was not enough. Elara turned back toward the tablet. There was another inscription beneath the first. She read it. "The guardian shall appear when the kingdom forgets the price of its crown." Her stomach tightened. What does that mean? Aldrin didn't answer. Because he had noticed something else. The tablet had continued. Elara moved closer. The Guardian will not save a king from his enemies. She swallowed. She will save the kingdom from its king. The torch crackled. Aldrin stepped away from the tablet. For the first time, Elara saw fear in the Alpha King's eyes. Not fear of Varrek. Not fear of an invading army. Fear of himself. A sound came from above. A heavy scratching against the castle doors. Then another. Then dozens. The king hurried up the stairs. Elara followed. When they returned to the great hall, the wolves were visible through the tall windows. White wolves. Dozens of them. They stood beyond the castle walls in the falling snow. They were not attacking. They were waiting. One enormous wolf separated from the pack. Its fur was white as winter. Its muzzle was grey with age. It crossed the courtyard slowly. Every guard along the wall stepped back. The wolf reached the great doors. Then it lowered its head. Not toward the king. Toward Elara. She walked closer. Aldrin followed, but the wolf's ears flattened when he approached. Elara stopped. The ancient wolf raised its head. Its eyes met hers. For one quiet moment, the entire fortress seemed to hold its breath. Then the wolf touched its nose to the iron door. Elara placed her palm against the other side. The wolf remained there. Warmth moved through the cold metal. And behind Elara, King Aldrin whispered the words that would change everything. Your father knew. By morning, Veyrath Fortress had become a place of whispers. Servants spoke in corners. Soldiers watched the courtyard. Nobles looked at Elara as if she had brought the wolves from the mountains herself. Lord Varrek was the first to say it aloud. She has awakened forbidden magic. He stood before the council wearing a dark fur-lined cloak, his silver hair perfectly arranged, his hands resting calmly over the head of his cane. The accusation spread quickly. Elara had summoned the wolves. Elara had entered the forbidden chamber. Elara had manipulated the king. By midday, the story had become something uglier. Some said she was a witch. Others said she was an enemy spy. Varrek did not correct them. He encouraged the fear. King Aldrin sat at the head of the council table, listening. His expression remained controlled. But Elara noticed his fingers. They were gripping the armrest. She knows an ancient language, Varrek said. She carries an artifact linked to a forbidden bloodline. And now wolves surround our fortress. He turned toward Elara. How convenient. Elara looked at him. I did not call them. Then why do they come? I don't know. Varrek smiled. Exactly. Aldrin rose. Enough. Varrek bowed. As you command. But his eyes remained on Elara. There was something behind them. Something cold. Elara had seen that look once before. In her father's study. The night before he disappeared. She remembered a stranger standing outside their cottage window. She remembered her father closing the curtains. She remembered him hiding a book beneath the floorboards. She remembered him saying one sentence. If anyone asks, you never saw him. Now she understood. The stranger had worn the same silver ring Varrek wore. That night, Elara returned to the throne room. The wolves were gone from the courtyard. But their paw prints remained in the snow. She followed them to the old western wall. There, frost had formed strange symbols across the stone. The same symbols from the seal. She touched one. The frost melted beneath her fingers. A hidden crack appeared. Behind it was a narrow compartment. Inside lay a leather journal. Elara recognized it immediately. Her father's handwriting filled the first page. She sank slowly onto the stone floor. For years, she had imagined what she would say if she ever found something belonging to him. Now she could not speak. Her fingers moved over the ink. The journal explained everything he had discovered. The old pact. The guardian bloodline. The royal betrayal. The disappearance of previous guardians. And Varrek. His name appeared again and again. Elara's heart pounded. Her father had discovered that Varrek had been destroying records connected to the Guardian family for decades. He had also discovered something worse. The royal court had been told the wolves protected the Alpha King. That was a lie. The wolves protected Veyrath. There was a difference. A terrible difference. The final pages were written in a hurried hand. If the seal awakens, the Guardian has returned. If the Guardian returns, Varrek will move quickly. Trust no one who fears the truth. Elara turned the page. There was only one sentence left. The throne must be judged before the first spring moon. A shadow fell across the page. Elara looked up. Varrek stood behind her. His face was calm. Almost gentle. He reached down and took the journal from her hands. "Thank you," he said. Elara stood. "Give it back." He smiled. "You have no idea what you found." "I know enough." "No." His voice became colder. "You know just enough to be dangerous." Guards entered behind him. Elara stepped backward. King Aldrin was nowhere in sight. Varrek lifted the journal. "Take her." The soldiers seized Elara's arms. She struggled. Not because she thought she could overpower them. Because she knew what the journal contained. "Where is the king?" Varrek leaned closer. "Exactly where I need him." The doors slammed shut. And for the first time since the wolves appeared, Elara wondered whether the Alpha King had been protecting her. Or whether he had already become Varrek's prisoner. The old archivist found Elara before midnight. His name was Thomas. He had served 3 kings and spent most of his life among books no noble cared enough to read. When the cell door opened, he stood outside holding a lantern. "Your father saved my life once," he whispered. Elara looked at him through the darkness. "Then help me." He unlocked the door. They escaped through a narrow passage beneath the kitchens, moving through tunnels where the walls were damp and the air smelled of ash. Thomas led her to a forgotten stable beyond the northern wall. A horse waited there. Beside it stood King Aldrin. Elara stopped. For several seconds she simply stared. The king looked exhausted. His royal cloak was gone. His hair was wet with snow. There was a cut along his cheek. "I thought you were imprisoned," Elara said. "I was." He looked toward the fortress. "Varrek believes I am still locked in the ceremonial chamber." Thomas looked at him. "Then why are you here?" Aldrin's eyes moved to Elara. "Because I finally remembered something." He reached inside his coat. He pulled out an old document. "My father signed this." Elara took it. The seal was broken. The document contained a confession. The first Guardian had been killed by an Alpha King who feared she would expose his cruelty. The wolves had abandoned the throne afterward. The royal family had spent generations hiding the truth. Varrek had helped them. Every generation. Every secret. Every missing record. Aldrin looked toward the mountains. "I was raised to believe the wolves belonged to the crown." His voice was quiet. "I was wrong." Elara folded the document. "We need the shrine." Aldrin nodded. They rode into the mountains before dawn. Snow struck their faces as they climbed. The forest swallowed the sound of the castle behind them. For hours they followed an ancient trail marked by stones shaped like wolf teeth. At last they reached a cliff. Aldrin dismounted. There was no door. No path. Only rock. Elara held the pendant against the stone. A deep vibration passed through the mountain. The rock split. A doorway opened. Inside, hundreds of candles ignited by themselves. The chamber was enormous. At its center stood a stone figure of a woman holding no sword, no crown, and no weapon. Only an open hand. Elara approached. The walls told the story. The first Guardian had not been a warrior. She had been a healer. She had treated wounded wolves during a famine. She had fed starving villagers before feeding herself. She had refused the first king's jewels. She had refused his title. She had asked only that the kingdom protect those who could not protect themselves. The king had promised. Then he broke that promise. When the Guardian discovered that soldiers were stealing food from mountain villages, she confronted him. He ordered her death. The wolves left the castle that same night. The kingdom survived. But the protection faded. Elara's eyes filled with tears. Her ancestors had carried the truth quietly for generations. Not because they wanted revenge. because they believed the kingdom could still be saved. A final carving appeared beneath the statue. Elara translated it. When the guardian returns, the throne shall be cleansed not by blood, but by surrender. Aldrin stared at the words. What must I surrender? Elara looked at him. She knew. The crown. The power. The right to command. The one thing an Alpha King was never supposed to give away willingly. A low growl echoed through the chamber. The ancient white wolf appeared at the entrance. Behind it stood the rest of the pack. The wolf walked to Elara and lowered its head. Then it looked toward Aldrin. The king slowly removed his sword. He placed it on the ground. The wolf did not move. Aldrin removed his royal ring. Still nothing. Then Elara saw the final inscription. The guardian does not choose the worthy king. The worthy king chooses the kingdom. Aldrin understood. But before he could speak, the mountain shook. Far away, bells began ringing. The castle. Varrek had returned. And he was moving against the throne. By the time Elara and Aldrin returned to Veyrath, the fortress gates were covered with black banners. Varrek stood on the highest balcony. The royal council stood behind him. The people of the surrounding villages had been ordered into the courtyard. Soldiers surrounded them. Aldrin stared at the scene. He has taken the kingdom. Elara shook her head. No. She looked toward the frightened villagers. He has taken the castle. There was a difference. They entered through the old western tunnel. Inside, the fortress felt wrong. The familiar halls were silent. Servants had disappeared. The great fire in the entrance hall had been allowed to die. Even the castle wolves were gone. Varrek had gathered everyone in the ceremonial chamber. King Aldrin was forced to his knees before the throne. Varrek stood beside him holding the ancient journal. You could have ruled peacefully, Varrek said. Aldrin looked up. You never wanted peace. Varrek smiled. I wanted order. You murdered people for it. I removed obstacles. Elara entered the chamber. Every head turned. Varrek's smile disappeared. The ancient pendant hung from her neck. Snow clung to her hair. The white wolf stood behind her. And beyond the windows, dozens more waited. Varrek lifted his hand. Soldiers raised their weapons. Kill her. No one moved. The soldiers looked toward the wolves. Then toward the king. Then toward Elara. Varrek shouted. Kill her. Still nothing. The ancient wolf stepped forward. A deep growl rolled through the chamber. Elara walked toward the throne. She was afraid. Her knees trembled. Her heart hammered against her ribs. But she kept walking. Varrek drew his sword. You think a few animals will save you? Elara looked at him. No. She glanced at Aldrin. I think the truth will. Varrek turned toward the king. Then prove them wrong. He forced Aldrin to stand. You will renounce the ancient pact. Aldrin looked at the throne. Then at the frightened people. Then at Elara. The old inscription seemed to appear in his mind. The worthy king chooses the kingdom. Aldrin reached for the crown. He removed it. The room became silent. Varrek's expression changed. What are you doing? Aldrin walked toward the center of the chamber. He placed the crown on the stone floor. I choose my people. Varrek stared at him. You surrender the crown. I surrender the right to rule them through fear. Varrek lunged. Elara moved backward. The guards raised their weapons. Then the wolves began to howl. Not one. Not 10. Every wolf surrounding the fortress. Their voices rose together until the walls shook. The silver seal above the throne blazed with light. Ancient lines appeared across the stone. Elara's pendant lifted from her chest. It floated before her. The symbol on it matched the seal. The floor trembled. Varrek dropped his sword. No. The throne cracked. A wave of silver light moved through the chamber. The walls began to glow. And suddenly, the throne showed them the past. A young guardian standing before an ancient king. Villagers starving. Soldiers stealing food. A king ordering the guardian's death. Then another memory. Varrek. Young. Standing beside the royal archives. Burning documents. Another memory. Varrek meeting a soldier. Another. A body carried through the snow. Another. Elara's father. Alive. Standing before Varrek. The chamber filled with gasps. Elara could not breathe. Her father had not disappeared because he stole the records. He had disappeared because he discovered the truth. Varrek had ordered his arrest. The throne showed everything. Every crime. Every lie. Every person Varrek had silenced. When the final memory faded, the chamber was silent. Varrek looked around. No one stood behind him. Not even the nobles. He sank to his knees. The ancient seal above the throne began to change. The broken silver lines joined together. The old symbol became whole. And the wolves outside suddenly fell silent. Varrek was not executed. Elara refused to allow it. For years, Varrek had answered fear with blood. She would not let the kingdom begin its new life by repeating the old mistake. He was stripped of his title. His estates were taken. His crimes were recorded in the royal archives where no king could erase them again. Then he was imprisoned in a remote fortress beyond the northern pass. There would be no songs about his death. No glorious final battle. Only the quiet weight of justice. The greater victory belonged to those who had survived him. The first thing King Aldrin did after Varrek's arrest was open the royal archives. Every sealed record connected to the Guardian bloodline was brought into the light. For 3 days, scribes worked beneath hundreds of candles. Names were restored. Families once branded traitors were cleared. Villages that had been ignored for generations received food from the royal stores. And one name was written across the first page of the restored history. Edric Vale. Elara stood before it for a long time. Her fingers touched the ink. She had spent half her life believing her father had vanished in shame. Now the kingdom knew he had died protecting the truth. Thomas stood beside her. You were right about him. Elara smiled through tears. I always hoped I was. Outside, bells rang across the mountain. Not for war. For celebration. Months passed. The snow slowly melted from the rooftops. The roads reopened. Merchants returned. Children began playing in the courtyard again. The castle no longer felt like a place built to keep people out. Its gates stood open during daylight. The villagers were invited inside. And the wolves returned to the mountains. All except one. The ancient white wolf remained. It slept near the eastern wall. It followed Elara through the gardens. It waited outside the archive whenever she worked. It never obeyed commands. It never acted like a trained animal. It simply chose to stay. One spring morning, King Aldrin found Elara beneath the restored seal. Sunlight poured through the tall windows. Dust moved through the golden beams. The silver inscription above the throne was no longer hidden. Everyone in Varrek could now read it. The king stopped several steps away. I want you beside the throne. Elara looked at him. As queen. Aldrin shook his head. As guardian. She smiled faintly. I don't need a crown. I know. He looked toward the open doors. Beyond them, children were carrying baskets of bread toward the village road. Farmers were speaking with soldiers. A wounded traveler was being treated by the royal healers. The kingdom was changing. Not because one person had become powerful. Because people had finally remembered what power was supposed to protect. Elara turned toward the throne. The black stone was no longer frightening. It was simply stone. The crown rested beside it. Not upon a head. Upon a table. A reminder. Power could be held. Power could also be surrendered. The ancient wolf appeared at the doorway. Elara crouched. It approached slowly. Its old paws made almost no sound against the stone. She held out her hand. The wolf lowered its head. Its nose touched her palm. For a moment, Elara remembered herself as a little girl beside a winter fire, listening to her father read from a book she barely understood. Some words are meant to be remembered. She finally understood what he had meant. King Aldrin walked toward the open doors. Elara followed. Outside, the mountains were bright beneath the morning sun. White wolves stood along the distant ridge, not surrounding the kingdom, watching over it. The people of Varrek looked toward them without fear. For 300 years, the kingdom had believed its strength came from the throne. It had believed the crown protected the people. It had believed wolves served kings. It had believed power was something to be defended at any cost. But the old seal had remembered the truth. A kingdom was not protected by the strongest person sitting above it. It was protected by the person willing to stand beneath it. Elara stopped at the top of the castle steps. The ancient white wolf stood beside her. The morning wind moved gently through her hair. Far below, the village bells began to ring. And for the first time in generations, the wolves answered not with warning, but with peace.